Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. Today we honor and celebrate, oh, those were the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And today we honor and celebrate his extraordinary life. We will listen to his words, reflect on the actions that led many to call him a modern-day prophet, and explore the deep connections between his teachings and our Unitarian Universalist principles. But first, let us talk a little bit about his life. So, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most inspiring and effective civil rights leaders of the 20th century, and certainly in the history of the United States. A little known fact is that he was born Michael King Jr. in January 1929. At age 5, his father took a trip to Germany and was profoundly inspired by the Protestant Reformation leader Martin Luther. And upon his return, he renamed himself and his son to Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a gifted student. He skipped 2 grades in high school and began college at the age of 15. Though he initially did not intend to become a minister, he was profoundly impacted by his college president, Benjamin E. Mays, who inspired him to follow in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. And Dr. King earned a BA in sociology, a master's in divinity, and then a doctorate from Boston University. In the mid-1950s, Dr. King settled in and married and built a family in Montgomery, Alabama, and he became a pastor. He was thrust into the civil rights movement and chosen to lead the bus boycott that was sparked by Rosa Parks. That boycott lasted over a year, and it resulted in the desegregation of the Montgomery buses, and Dr. King became known nationwide as a civil rights leader. As a founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King advocated for nonviolence resistance to racial injustice through sit-ins, marches, and peaceful demonstrations. Even in the face of violence and imprisonment, King stayed true to his beliefs. He created a movement that demanded equality and dignity. In his well-known letter from a Birmingham jail written during the campaign against segregated lunch counters, Dr. King languaged his philosophy of nonviolence and inspired people across the country to action. Dr. King endured great sacrifices. He was jailed 29 times on charges ranging from civil disobedience to trumped-up offenses like exceeding a speed limit by 5 miles an hour in Montgomery. And I don't know if many of you know that Dr. King was stabbed during a book signing in Harlem. He was stabbed by a mentally ill woman with a letter opener. The blade just missed his aorta. The doctor said it was a sneeze away from being fatal. From his hospital bed, he forgave his attacker and issued this statement: I felt no ill will towards Mrs. Isola Curry, and know that thoughtful people will do all in their power to see that she gets the help she apparently needs if she is to become a free and constructive member of society. Talk about walking the walk, right? Thursday, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was fatally shot by James Earl Ray as he stood on a second-floor balcony of a motel. Dr. King's family members, including his wife, did not believe that James Earl Ray acted alone. and they believed that the assassination was a conspiracy. Martin Luther King was 39 years old. Dr. King's unwavering commitment to justice forever changed the fabric of America. His legacy continues to inspire movements for equality and human rights, not just here in the United States, but globally. However, Martin Luther King was not always beloved. Author Aisha Asano shares in her book, I don't have the title of her book, she shares that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a radical. In 1967, he was called the most dangerous man in America by the FBI, who had a 17,000-page file on him. And it wasn't just the FBI and the KKK or those positions in power who disagreed or hated him. Cornel West explains in his book, The Radical King, by the time of King's death, most of the country disliked him. But in a most recent Gallup poll, 94% of Americans hold a very favorable opinion of Dr. King, who went from being one of the most hated people in the U.S. to one of the most loved. How did this happen? Was it his alignment with truth, or his very clear idea of what is love? Dr. King had some revolutionary ideas about love and power. Let's listen to him.
What happened is that some of our philosophers got off base. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites. So that love is identified with a resignation of power, and power with a denial of love. It was this misinterpretation that caused the philosopher Nietzsche, who is the philosopher of the will to power, to reject the Christian concept of love. It was the same misinterpretation which induced Christian theologians to reject Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power in the name of the Christian idea of love. Now we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best. Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love.
Too often, love is identified with the resignation of power, and power with the denial of love. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best, correcting everything that stands against love. We could spend the rest of our afternoon exploring what we just heard, ruminating in these words of the beloved Dr. King. Just bringing his words into our being. He surely sounds like a Unitarian Universalist, doesn't he? So with his words in our heart, let us explore the parallels of Dr. King's teachings and the principles of Unitarian Universalism. First principle: the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Dr. King's mission stemmed from a belief in the worth and dignity of all people. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, he wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of neutrality, tied in a single garment of destiny." Dr. King's call to confront systems of oppression resonates with our first principle deeply. Second principle: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Dr. King was a fervent supporter of justice and compassion. In his I Have a Dream speech, he shared the following. He said, "My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Unfortunately, we live in a time where opposing equity, justice, and compassion in human relations has become politically and culturally acceptable. And it is our calling as Unitarian Universalists to be crusaders for Dr. King's dream and for the dream he had for his children. The third principle: acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. Dr. King understood that spiritual growth is not only an individual journey, it's a collective one. He urged communities to confront systematic injustice together, viewing this work as a path towards spiritual awakening, transformation, and an opportunity to merge with those we are different than. Fourth principle: free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Dr. King's sermon, Knock at Midnight, spoke about his concern about the need for us to move from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. He shared that when machines and computers, profits and property are more important than people, then the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Our fifth principle: the right of conscience in the use of democratic process. During the civil rights movement, Dr. King's leadership was a true example of the use of democracy to achieve social change. He modeled how collective action could hold systems accountable. Dr. King had a great ability to continue to believe even in the darkest of times. He had faith. And he would say we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. I'm going to read that again. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Sixth principle: the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. King's quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice," was actually inspired by a Unitarian Universalist minister. Many of you might be familiar with this. His name is Theodore Parker. And this interpretation of Reverend Parker's teaching became a familiar quote and cornerstone of the civil rights movement, and also an inspiration for the effort for global justice, not just in the United States. And the final principle, number 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part of. King's vision of a beloved community reflects the idea that we must honor the sacred ties among all people in the world that we inhabit. The beloved community is not just about human relationships, but also about creating a world where every part of the interdependent web is treated with dignity and respect. So as we celebrate the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, let us not confine his teachings to the past. Let's embody his and our principles in our lives. Commit to acts of justice, to the pursuit of equity, to the cultivation of compassion. Join a cause that speaks to your heart, whether it's dismantling racism, addressing climate justice, or supporting the vulnerable or the underserved in your community. The ways we could be in action are truly endless. We know this. And if you're looking for a way, feel free to join our monthly racial and social justice meetings hosted by Leandra Pires and myself. Our next one is January 30th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. All are welcome. Bring your friends, bring your kids, bring the people you know, bring the people you don't know. It's a great opportunity, and we're always looking for ways to help, to be of assistance. So join us. In closing, tomorrow marks both the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday and the inauguration of Donald Trump for a second term. A day many of us approach with heavy hearts and profound concern. So as we leave this sacred space, let us carry the teachings of Dr. King and the principles of our Unitarian Universalist faith with us, awakening us to embody and strive for our values even in these most challenging of times. Yesterday, I met with Karen Washington, and she was kind enough to listen to me go through a first draft of our sermon today. And she offered me some feedback, telling me to speak a little slower at certain points. Thank you, Karen. But she also suggested that as we do this work, we should consider not what we are fighting against, but what are we striving for? To stay in alignment with what we are for. Thank you, Karen. Regardless of the circumstance, let us commit to building the beloved community that Dr. King so passionately envisioned, drawing strength from his incredible and prophetic voice as we create this world that honors the inherent worth and dignity of all people. May we all be part of this great calling, and may it be so. Thank you, everyone. If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.